Hey there, welcome to today's episode. It's going to be a live, unedited session. Apologies for any background noise. We're working with the Roland P-6. I had one of these, I sold it, and then I bought another one. Great little device. I missed the one that I had. I bought the first one brand new. This one I picked up secondhand in the UK, 120 quid. It's about the going rate. 120, 130, and for that you get a hell of a lot of sampler. Even at full price, 165, 170, it's still a hell of a lot of sampler. Think about what its competitors are in that price bracket for the size, the portability, full standalone sampler that is really teeny tiny, built-in battery, built-in microphone, fantastic step sequencer. I can't really think of much. The Teenage Engineering KO2 is far more expensive new. On the second-hand market, maybe 200 quid for one of those, so close, but I still prefer this as a device, not really much else. Always compared to the SP404 Mark II. This is more expensive for a reason, does more features, does a hell of a lot more, in fact. But this still does enough to make whole beats. A lot of people are under the impression that because you can't chain the patterns together automatically, that it's not so easy to make beats on this thing, but it still moves through the patterns in real time. If you play one pattern and you switch to the next pattern before it ends, it moves seamlessly through those patterns. So yeah, to record it out, your track, your beat, you might have to do that with a little bit more of a manual feel, but it's really not that difficult, and that's a whole beat. And for all of these devices, Koala Sampler, the MPC, the SP404 Mark II, that's how I have to do it with all of those. I still make the beat in whatever way, and yes, maybe I've got an automatic mode to play through the sequences, but it still ends up in the DAW because I don't have a LUFS meter. I might want to do a little bit of just final compression and EQ inside of the DAW, but I tend to just take one audio file, not even separate tracks, and then just get that ready to be put out into the world. And you can do exactly that here. If you wanted to, you could mute individual pads and still send separate audio tracks out and just record them in real time. But I like taking just one audio file and then getting it ready for Spotify, whatever it is. So let's come out of the patterns. Let's start. You'll notice no samples at all. I like to blank my device before I begin. It comes with a bunch of built-in sounds that you can noodle around with. But who uses those really? Ultimately, you're going to do some sampling, bring your own samples in. I don't really care for the sample editing tool. There's nothing wrong with it. But unlike the SP404 Mark II, where you have an SD card, you can just load samples up and call them up on the device. This, you have to use the little sample editor transfer tool, which currently I think only works from a desktop computer. If it was on an iOS device or Android, that would open up a world of possibilities. But I believe at the moment it can only come from your desktop computer. So for me, rather than go into the hassle of transferring it and having to install these separate tools, because it's the sample editing transfer tool, but that means you have to then have the Roland Cloud Manager, and if you don't want that, then it's something that you kind of have to install to get access to it. So it turns into more effort, whereas we can just treat it as a blank canvas and we can sample into it. Quick way to do it, hold down the keyboard button, KYBD, turn the device on, do a factory reset whenever you just want to blank the device. It takes a couple of minutes and gets rid of all sounds, all patterns. You can begin again. We've got some samples loaded up on the iPad, so we'll begin by sampling into this thing. All we have to do is go to sampling mode, and then we can choose the sample rate, anything from 44.1 all the way down to 1100. And we've got the option of mono or stereo. If we do stereo at 44.1, the highest quality, about 3 seconds, switch that to mono, it doubles the length to 6 seconds, and that happens for all of the sample rates. So the longest you can sample would be down at 1100 in mono. Gives you roughly around 27 seconds, so a decent amount of sampling time. It is all per pad though, so whether it's 3 seconds in highest quality, 27 at the lowest, then you can still do that per pad moving through. So it's not as convenient as, say, an MPC or the SP, where you can just record really high quality stereo files for, as long as you want, really. We still just have to do it in chunks, and it's just a tiny bit more effort. It's really not that bad. I'm going to go, excuse me, with 44.1, and we're going to set this to mono. The reason being, we're bringing in drum sounds, and we're just going to create some one-shots, so they don't need to be stereo. That's going to give me about 6 seconds. That's going to be plenty for doing this. If we move over here, we can choose the way that we record. I'm going to keep it in free mode, where it's just going to record for as long as it can, dependent on the sample rate. But I'll probably be stopping it short using the sampling button just to take what we want. We can set it to whole bars. You can even do beats at the beginning, but whole bars which means resampling whole patterns is really easy on here. Creates perfect loops, no need to tweak start and end points. We'll look at that later on. Let's keep it in free mode. Over here, the threshold or off, and you also have sync and toggle. There's a couple of different modes. We're not deep diving, but basically if you want to sync it to the play button, you can. Here, I want to set a threshold because I don't want to worry about the start point of the sample. If we have a threshold, it waits till the volume level is loud enough before it begins recording. And that way for little things like one-shots, it's going to just give us a perfect start point. And because it's a one-shot, I don't really need to worry about the end point as long as I just kind of stop it at a decent place. So for now, that's what we're going to do. But you've got different levels you can set it. I'm going to do minus 24 dB. You can experiment with it depending on how loud the device is you're trying to record from. If we move over to the end, that is a little bit of gain control, which at the moment, I think it seems to just control the gain for the microphone. So if you're using the built-in microphone, you can change this. It doesn't seem to change the gain control for me when it's an input signal coming from an external source through the line in. But you can change that in the settings. If we exit out of here and do shift and menu and go through the hieroglyphics until you get one that says in gain. There is one in here somewhere. I might have gone past it already, but somewhere in these settings, this one allows you to set the input gain control. I have it cranked up to max, so it's just as loud as it can be. But if you need to turn it down, you can reduce that input gain. You can control it that way. Let's exit out and exit again. So we're good to go. We're going to sampling. We've got our sample rate and everything set. Choose a pad, press sampling, and it goes into standby because we've got a threshold set. And now I'm just going to trigger a kick drum, something that I like from my iPad, and press stop whenever I feel like we've recorded for enough time. It's going to normalize that sample and it's going to write it and put it on the pad. There we go. Got a little bit of volume control where we can extend that if we need to, make it louder. So that's our first sample, and it's really that simple. Let's get a couple more samples. Say I want this hi-hat. I'm going to do the same thing. Choose the pad, sample. Make sure it's got enough time, and it's going to do exactly the same thing. Now I've got a hi-hat that we can play with, and let's go with a snare drum. This one's actually quite good because it's a double snare, and that'll let us look at start and end points just very quickly. So let's record that one. We'll go to sampling, pad again, and that one. Make sure it's had enough time to record, stop it, and there we go. So these are all mono samples at 44.1, the highest quality. Now, strange little snare drum with like a double roll in it, but it lets us look at some of these options. Now, these encoders over here are multi-use encoders. It depends on what menu you're inside of as to what they're changing. By default, when you're just on the main mode, so we're not inside of sampling, we're just in our main mode, it's pitch, start and end, and level. We've already seen level, but lets us turn the sample up and down. Obviously, it's the volume level. Pitch, plus and minus 24 semitones, so lots of range. And it's really nice pitch. If you've ever used an old SP303, the sound quality, the compressors, the vinyl sim's amazing on those, but the pitching was pretty terrible. This is really good pitching. And then the sample start and end point. So if we wanted to, and we wanted the second of these two little snare drums together, then we could use the start point to scroll through. Scroll through until we just clear out the first one. And the same with the end point. We'll just keep the first one and we'll take the end point down. Now there will be some dead space because I press stop wherever I press stop, but it's an easy way to get rid of it. And around there is pretty good. These two have fine tuning. You can go into the voice menu in sample edit and fine tune further. However, on a day-to-day basis, I don't really do that. I find that just the typical start and end point chopping is just fine for my needs. But if you need to fine tune, you can go further into this. When some people describe it as menu divey, I think that's maybe because they need to do that. I don't know why you need to do that so often. I don't find that I ever really use it, but you can. There is fine tuning if you need to go further. So that's us. 3 nice basic sounds. Let's talk about resampling. Now, unlike the MPC where you have to choose a specific input and get it kind of set up for your resampling, which isn't a particular pain, but it is extra steps, this will just resample kind of by default. It's either listening to the input or it's listening to the device. So let's say with our snare drum, we want to resample that with a little bit of an effect. We've got 5 basic effects, just like you have on the SP404 Mark II, and then the MFX list where you have a kind of list of more effects. These kind of 5 are sort of set in stone. You can't move them around like you can on the SP. But the MFX is the same. You hold it down, and then you have a list of effects that you can run through. So if I move through, you'll see a bunch of them here. If I go to this one, it's a little bit of reverb. Let's say I want some reverb on my snare drum. There you go. We use our control knobs over here to change the parameters for that effect. And you'll get 3 parameters. Press Shift. You can change 3 more parameters. You'll have to look through the manual just to see exactly what you're changing. But typically, most effects have around 6 parameters per effect that you can change. So over here, this one, I believe, is kind of like the balance, the mix. So you can hear it. And something like this will be the time. We're not going through all of these. I just want to show you. But this one's probably the time, the decay. So I want a little bit of decay, and I want the mix to be quite subtle. I only want a little bit of this effect, so we'll dial it back. Just like that, real subtle, but that's all I want. We could come in and you can change the EQ, the dampening, that type of thing, but we're just going to leave it. To resample, you just go straight back into sampling, and I'm not changing any inputs. I'm not doing anything else with it. I'm just going to select a new pad. It remembers the last sample rate and things that we had chosen, so we're just going to keep with that for now, but you could change it. And then all I have to do is press record, goes into standby, trigger our pad with the effect. I'm going to let that one play a little bit longer just because of the reverb tail, just to make sure it's there. But that's it. It's going to do the same thing, normalize and write it to the pad. And we've freed up that effect because we've baked it into the sample. While we're quickly talking about the effects, you have your 5 main ones. You have your MFX list where there's a lot more effects. And then you also have some kind of send and return effects. So you've got this delay and reverb that are main output level, if you like, but they're there that you can apply even on top of this other delay and the reverb that's here. You've just got these kind of permanent main output effects, if you like. We'll talk about that maybe throughout this episode, maybe not, but we'll see. But just be aware that they are there. Like, so we've now got our 3 sounds. This is our dry snare. And the nice one with a little bit of reverb. We'll turn that up a bit. But you can hear it. It's got that reverb. We're going to delete this one out just so I can show you deleting pads. I could delete multiple pads at the same time, but we're just going to get rid of the dry snare that we don't need. I don't particularly need to, but just so that you can see how you can free up spaces, let's delete that one out. So now we've got 3 basic sounds. These pads are not velocity sensitive in the sense that as you apply different pressure, you will get varying rates of velocity. They don't work like that. They're fixed. You can set the fixed amount though. Anything from 0 to 127, a typical velocity range. By default, they're set to 100, and I typically leave it there because it just usually means I've got a little bit more volume control. I can mess around, and velocity control when you're editing the steps. So 100 is good for me, but if you wanted them cranked up to max, you can go in and set it to 127 or any other amount. So we've got those. They're very playable pads. I kind of prefer them to the SP404 Mark II. They feel like the old SP303, kind of spongy and like triggery, but they're very sensitive. Not velocity sensitive, but sensitive when you just want to trigger them. We can record in real time if we like. So you want to do some finger drumming and just put that into your pattern. You can do that. A couple of little tips. Pattern and the record button is a quick way of turning the metronome off or on. So this is it set on. You can hear that ticking through. So if we wanted to, we could come in, press record, and record in real time. You can do that with quantization on or quantization off. And a quick way to do that is with Shift and Quantize under the record button to turn quantization on or turn it off. So whether you're snapping to the grid or you're not, we're going to leave it off, and I'm going to turn the metronome back off as well. Reason for that is because we're going to use the step sequencer. One of the best things about this is the step sequencer. Better than the SP404 Mark II. I'm just going to go out there and say that. I really think it is much better. More hands-on, more intuitive, does more in my opinion, and just, yeah, generally is easier to work with. In order to do it, we just choose a sample and then start inputting to the steps. We could set the BPM to something else if we like. Let's just set it up to 83. And then, I don't know, some kick drums here and here, maybe like this. Another one here. Doesn't matter because we can move them all around, but that's how you input the steps. You just press them, you input them, or take them out. If we go to the hi-hats, I'm just going to put those across the board. And with our snare drum, you'll notice these little dots representing the beats throughout the bar, because 16 steps typically represents one bar. So we can just put our snare drums in the usual places. So really simple to create a drum loop. Now that's a little bit rigid, it's not very nice. So how do we jazz it up? Well, we've got swing, that's one of the starting points. Swing is on here where it says shuffle. So technically it's shuffle, but it's swing. What we'll do shift and D, and this goes to -90 or +90. So there's a huge range of swing that you can kind of experiment with. You'll notice it's got a negative amount or a plus amount. I'm just going to leave it at 0 and just dial in a little bit of swing for this episode, just so that you can see what it sounds like. Because at the moment, it's quite a rigid sounding drum break. We want to add some swing and some life to it. There you go. Around 37. We could go up to 90, which is some pretty heavy swing. But for today's episode, let's just leave it there. But that's how you dial it in and we start getting some nice swing to the drums. Let's exit out of that menu. So really simple stuff. Then we can look at our parameters that we can change per step. Again, pretty simple. But if we have something like our kick drums highlighted, we can see them on the steps. You'll notice before we were just kind of putting these notes in by quickly tapping them. But if you long press, you'll notice you get a little set of options on the screen. That's controlled by the Granular button. It flashes to let you know that's what you're doing. And we can just cycle through these options. There's not a lot of options in here, but there's enough. The first one is the note. So you want to change the pitch. That's one way of changing pitch. You can move up and down through the note range. So if I wanted this second kick drum on this step to be a lower or higher pitch, I can just move the note up and down. C4 typically being kind of like the root level note. Then what we'll do, we can move over where we've got velocity. Now, I do actually want to change that. I want to make this second kick drum a little bit quieter than the first. So I'm going to bring the velocity down. Over here, we have probability per step. We'll look more at that in a second, but of course, it's probability. It's the chance that you can set that it will be triggered as it loops around. So useful for more complex patterns. Over here, we've got gate, which is the length of the note that you can experiment with as well. Here, we've got T for timing. So we can move off the step by default set to, in this case, 1/16 note. You can change that inside of the menu if you want 132. You can come down to like 1/8, 1/4 notes, I think. But inside of the options for the steps, we're just keeping it today with 1/16 notes with 16 steps. So it's nice and simple, but you can change it. But what we're doing here, for that note that is on this 16th of a step, there's a 1/16 step, then we're changing the position of it. In the middle at 0, it's just like it was snapped to the grid. And if we move it to a minus amount, it's going to be before the grid. And if we move it to a plus amount, it is after the grid. So you can start shifting things around, getting more swing and more variation, stuff like that. It's a really useful little thing. We'll look more at that in a second, but that's what it's for. And then over here, we have ratchet, where you're adding note repeats. And again, I'm going to show you that in real time in a second. So for now, let's just move across through these steps. I want this one here as well to be a little quieter, and the same for this one. So you can see I'm quickly just grabbing some of these. I haven't found any way to grab multiple steps at the same time. You'll notice I can. If I do this, it looks like that would change multiple notes at the same time, but I haven't found that it does. Let me know in the comments if you know a workaround for that, because it'd be kind of nice if you could select at least multiple steps at the same time, change those parameters. We'll do one last one over here, and I'm just changing the velocity is all I want to do for these. Just want a little bit of velocity variation for the kick drums. Same when we get to our hi-hats. Let's quickly just run through some of these. Even though if we can only select one step at a time, it's still not a long process. As you can see, just come in and tweak a couple of things. And I don't need to do this with any great precision. I just want to do it very quickly. I changed the probability there, so I've moved back so I can just change this. All I want is the velocity change, and one here as well, just like that. Now, I'm going to add an extra hi-hat in here. So let's put it there. So you can hear it, you get this extra little hi-hat step. On this particular step, we're going to add a ratchet. We're going to do a note repeat. So you've got all of these kind of divisions, these ways to add your note repeats. Triple, quadruple, that type of thing. You can scroll through and experiment and see what results it gives you. We're just going to do something like a little triple, just nice and easy. You can hear it puts that little triple note roll in there. With this one, let's say we wanted the velocity to be down a bit. I don't want it so loud. I want it to be a little thing that's kind of in the background. And I'm actually going to change the probability. Let's put the probability down to, I don't know, 60% chance that it's going to trigger. And we're just going to run that through just so that you can see it's only going to trigger every so often. The higher you set it, the more likely. The lower you set it, the less likely. There we go. Just added it in. Good way of bringing life to your beats because it's probability. It's not always going to trigger and you can go wild with that. So there we go. We've got that set up. Let's take a look at snare drums. And with these, I'm going to move the timing ever so slightly. So I'm just going to put it behind the grid. If you bring things before the grid to the left with a negative amount, that's a way of adding kind of urgency to things. It makes it feel kind of more immediate. That's what you're looking for. If you want a laziness to it, a kind of more mellow kind of swing, I move things after the grid. So we're moving it to the right-hand side. And that's what I'm doing, just a small amount. In fact, what I'll do with this one, let's move it a big amount so you can just see what happens if you really crank this thing up. We'll go with 30 on this snare drum, but just look at the timing as it hits this step. So you can hear it's got this hesitancy before it kicks in. At 30, that's quite a lot, so it doesn't sound great, but small amounts can make a big difference. I'm going to go back to timing, and I'm going to say just something really subtle, about 7, and I'll probably just duplicate it on this step as well, just for some consistency. So we'll go with 7. Yeah, just a little bit of laziness to those drums. So we've made a drum loop. Let's say we were short on space and we want to take this whole pattern and just bounce it down, record it, resample it to a new pad. It's really simple to do. And don't forget, every time we do this, we can add more effects in and different things. You want to put a little compression in there, some vinyl sim, some EQ. Now, we are going to look at EQ because on this device, it's a couple of things that I want to give you some tips and tricks on. First, let's just look at the general balance. Now, we know when we have our pads selected, the level button over here in the basic menu will change the volume level. So I'm just listening for volume at the moment just to make sure everything seems okay. Yeah, all right, rough balance for now. One other cool thing about the P6, unlike the SP404 Mark II, it'd be nice to see this on the SP, is we have filters per pad. Now, you can achieve the same effect on the SP404 Mark II by resampling like we did with the reverb earlier, but this actually has dedicated filters per pad. So things like my hi-hats, sometimes I like to filter those down a little bit. It's just personal preference. Same with kick drums. Sometimes it's nice to take some of the high end out of the kick drum and have it just kind of really subdued, very punchy. But let's start with this little hi-hat. I can do filter, so sample, edit, and filter, shift, filter. Lets me choose the type, low pass, band pass, high pass, that type of thing. We're going to stay with a low pass filter, just turn it on. And then with these other encoders, I can change some of the parameters. So what we'll do over here, if we have our cutoff and our resonance, no resonance, and I just want to do a simple cutoff where we take out some of the high end. We can do this in real time as it's playing, or we can just do it from the pad, depends on what you prefer. But you can hear, we can filter it down. I'm going to do it as it's playing. Just a small amount of filtering to just make it fit in a little bit better. It just feels like it belongs there. So filtering per pad, also kind of unique to the P6 as opposed to the SP404 Mark II. Let's come out of here. So we've set that up. We've done a couple of things. Let's talk about EQ. The reason I want to mention EQ and not go through all of the other effects is because they're all pretty self-explanatory. And if you've used an SP404 Mark II, something like that, you can play around and experiment. But you've got your loopers, your pitch, delays, reverb, isolators, compression, vinyl sim. There's all kinds of stuff in here. But what you will notice in this list, there is no dedicated EQ. Now, we've got filters, so that's a way of EQ, and you can just filter out certain frequencies. You can use high pass, low pass, whatever, to isolate something. But when you want to boost something with an EQ, there is no dedicated EQ effect. something that might be nice in a firmware update. The reason for that being is that we can kind of trick it and we can kind of navigate around, but it would be nice to have a proper dedicated EQ where you can select specific frequencies. For now though, if you go along, let's actually start out of the MFX. If you go to filter, that's one place. If you go into the manual and take a look at the parameters per effect, filter, you will notice if you hold down shift at the end here, control 2, I believe, changes the frequency, the low end frequency. So with this one, we can select a specific frequency, but it's just for the low end. And we could set that frequency. And then with control knob 3, we can do a boost. It's a low end boost. So you can boost, say, 60 for your kick drums or 80 or whatever it is you're trying to boost in that particular frequency range. So that's one way, but that only really applies to the low end. It's just a low end. So that's the filter. If you go over to MFX and you go to ring mod, so ring modulation, of course, or chorus, and I'm going to use chorus for this demonstration, you get some EQ in there. You'll have to, again, look at the manual, but you'll notice on the shift and the parameters for those two effects, there is some high and low EQ. You can't choose the frequency, but overall, if you just need a quick high-end boost or a low-end boost, you'll be able to do that. Now, it might seem a little bit strange because, of course, ring modulation and chorus are pretty hefty effects if you've got them dialed up. But what you can do is just set the balance. So in this case with the chorus, I'm just going to turn everything down. With the first 3 parameters, the drums just play as normal. If I hold down shift now, this one over here changes the low end, and this one changes the high end. This one is like a general volume control as well, where you can play around with levels. So we'll just leave that turned on, and I'll mess around with these two, but you'll notice this one should be changing the high end. This one is the low end. So there you go. You can EQ on this device. You just kind of have to know where it's hidden. A little bit of low-end boost, a little bit of high-end boost. If that's what we wanted applied to our drums, we can leave that on as we resample that loop down. And of course, you can just keep resampling as many times as you want in order to add multiple effects. So the first time I resample is because I want to change the EQ. After I've done that, well, I want a little compression or I want the vinyl sim. I can just keep repeating that process. And because it's so easy to do on this device, it takes just a few seconds. Longer when I'm talking about it, of course. So that's what we've done. We've got a little bit here. Let's just stick with that. Let's maybe just boost the EQ a tiny little bit. What have we got in the high end? Just like that. Sounds okay for today's episode. Let's do some resampling. So we go back into sampling, exactly the same steps as we took before. If at this point, for some reason, I want to change my sample rates, then this would be the time to do it. One of the big reasons you might want to do that, as I've already mentioned, is that we can record now in whole bars. And because this is a pattern that we want to bounce down, that's what I want to take a look at. So free mode, and then we move over to beats into bars. What it shows you is how long you can record for per effect or sample rate is what I'm trying to say. So when we look here, let's say we want to stay with 44.1. There's no point in having stereo because we've already just used mono samples. Now, if you applied a little reverb or something that adds some stereo to it, maybe you'd want to keep that. But for now, let's just say 44.1. We want to stay with the highest quality, but in mono. And then when I take a look here and I move this, it will tell me what is the max I can record for that particular sample rate. So as I move this through, you'll notice it stops at 2 whole bars. So I can turn this now into a 2 whole bar loop. If we drop the sample rate and change this, I could go up to 4 bars. And if I go further, of course, 1400, I could get 6 bars out of it, so on and so forth. So that's the way, at least it tells you how many bars you're going to be able to kind of resample. We're going to stick with 44.1 in mono. And for the sake of it, let's just make it a 2-bar loop. I'm generally going to be working with 1 bar for today's episode, but let's just make it a 2-bar loop so you can see how it works. All I have to do is choose a pad now, choose my sampling button, and you'll notice it goes into standby because we still have the same threshold that we set before. You can switch it to sync, which works with the play button if you want to, but the threshold still works as well. So I'll just press play. It's going to record for 2 bars. And there you go. It stopped. Sometimes it doesn't sound like it's made a perfect loop, but fingers crossed it should be. So as it's kind of normalizing and writing, we've now saved that over here. Or which pad did we save it to? That's 3. Quick tip while we're here, couldn't remember what pad we'd resampled it to. If you press loop, that's a quick way to stop the playback of samples, but also a double tap of the play button. You've got a long sample, you don't want to listen to it, because you'll notice when it's just in one-shot mode, if you try and stop it, it just keeps playing. You can tap loop, or a quick double tap of the play button will stop the sample from playing back. So it's on pad 3, that's what I was looking for. So we've got that here now. We could change the volume of that and beef it up a bit. And in order to free up some space, we don't need any of the other samples anymore. So we can come in, take those samples, and delete them. Now all we've got is our drum loop. The important bit is that as we've deleted, so those samples no longer exist, we only have our drum loop, pattern information doesn't disappear. Now that can be useful because let's say we had the same thing. We want to try out some different snare sounds. We want to try out different kick drums, but to the same pattern. That's a way that you can delete the pad, but you could load up another sample and still keep the same drum pattern or whatever it happens to be that you're working on. You get the idea. Because we just want to put our loop in now, we want to delete all this information. So I'm going to do Shift and pattern clear for all, and that's going to clear everything inside of this pattern. If you just want to do it for one particular pad, let's say just clear out the kicks, the snare drums or the hi-hats, I could do pad instead of all and just clear that particular pattern out, but we're going to do everything. So we no longer have any pattern information in here. And in order to put the drums back in, because we haven't changed anything in terms of the BPM, it's 2 bars at 83. I can just take this sample and load it onto the first step. Technically, we could go into our last and set this to 32 bars or 32 steps even, because we've made it a 2-bar loop. So that would play across our 2 bars. Or it's still a perfect loop. I'm going to keep it with 16 steps just for 1 bar in this episode. So there we go. We've taken some drum sounds individual. We've also just then resampled those down using some effects to create a nice little drum loop. And as I said, we could apply more effects. When it comes to effects on this device, you have buses similar to the SP404 Mark II. So if you want to turn on certain effects and have that just kind of routed to a certain pad, you can do that using the buses. We won't go into it in today's episode, but that is available to you, similar to what it is on the SP404 Mark II. So you can kind of assign effects to just individual samples, individual pads if you need to. We'll just keep it like this because we're just sort of resampling and baking in effects where we need them. We've now got that set up. I'm just going to leave it there. If I wanted to, I could copy the pad over, exchange positions with another pad, something to be kind of neat. We know we've just cleared out everything except our pad number 3. I'm just going to leave it where it is. So we want to do some more sampling. We want to take a sample so that we can look at sample chopping and some other stuff. This thing has so much potential as a little device because there's just so many ways you can do stuff. Now, when it comes to sampling, we've already looked at like some one-shots and some drum sounds. What we could do, that if we close out, I'm going to close out one source that I'm sampling from for now, and I'm going to open up another one. This is now a synth application. I've actually got my MIDI controller set up today, which is plugged into the iPad, but it is also plugged into the Roland P-6, and I'll tell you why in a second. But for now, as I press this, this is just one of the synth apps. This is the, I can't remember, Audio Kit J1 or something, or the J6 it's called. Check it out. I'm not affiliated or anything. I can't remember if it's free, but the Audio Kit stuff's usually cheap. Or if you like the sounds, that's what we're playing around with. So we've got that as a sampling source. One thing you can do, you can record in real time to this device. So let's say you've got a guitar, some other external instrument that you want to record in. It's not so simple in the sense that I can just be playing my drum loop and then start recording and play along to that drum loop. But you can, in a way, if you use the metronome instead. It's just something that I want to show you because I haven't seen too many people talk about this. But let's say that's what you like doing. You want to set up 2 bars, 4 bars, whatever, and you want to play your guitar or play a synth app or something like this, and you want to do it in real time into the device. You can do it. If we just exit out of here for a second, one thing we'll need is a metronome, because if we turn the metronome on with pattern and quantize, a quick way of turning this on, we'll have it set like that. Because the device resamples whenever you're in sampling mode like this, it's going to start recording. It would be recording with the drum sounds and whatever else we bring in at the same time. Now, that doesn't give you much flexibility because, of course, you're merging the 2 audio samples. But if we come back out, we can go to pad number 3, do shift, and I can mute that pad for a second. Now, when I go into sampling, I can still hear the metronome. And the cool thing about that is that it doesn't pick up the metronome. So when we start recording, and I'll just noodle around with something basic, it doesn't matter, we're not really going to keep it for here. But let's say let's just change the settings to 22 just to make sure we've got enough sampling time, and choose a pad. It's still in standby mode. When I press play to hear the metronome, it doesn't trigger the recording. It doesn't pick that up. It only picks up what we're playing from the external source. So I can let this thing come around. And because that's all I want, I could set it to sort of specific lengths, things like that. We just recorded for a little piece, but it just means that we now have this. And because we recorded it to the metronome, it's still going to be in time with the drums. We just can't really record to those drums at the same time, which would be nice, but this is still a workaround if you like recording in real time. So that's there. We could just put that onto the first step, shift and unmute our drums. Now, I recorded longer. I recorded for roughly about 2 bars, but you get the idea. That's how we can do that. We can kind of record in real time. So that's one way of bringing audio samples in. We're going to delete that because I don't want it. I want to talk about some of the other options. Now, as you can see, with a synth app and a MIDI keyboard, I can just take advantage of any other sound source. And of course, that could be a turntable, can be anything that you like. But let's say we're talking about something like an instrument. What I can do is I can use the P6 to play an instrument as well. So all we really need is one C note recorded from whatever source that we're talking about. We'll just keep it with the same one. I know this is a C note on my MIDI keyboard, so we'll just quickly go into sampling. And again, I'll keep it whatever quality it is for now. It doesn't matter. It's in standby. Record one C note for however long I want. Just going to let that play through, drop out, and then stop it. It's going to give us that C note. And when we have this particular sample selected, we can go into keyboard mode and we can now play that sample chromatically. And we've got octaves just like we have on our MIDI keyboard. So we've just turned the little P6 into a very similar instrument. Sure, we don't have all of the effects from the application, but we can apply effects in here. And one thing you'll notice, this is currently monophonic. If I want to change that, shift and gate, and it's now polyphonic. I don't know what the limit is. I've got a feeling it'll let you play 3 or 4 pads, steps at the same time. I think that's kind of its voice limit, but that's still plenty for noodling around and getting chords and things. And if we wanted a little delay or some type of effect, we could do that. We could even apply one of the dedicated delay and send effects that we've got on here to really kind of expand that sound. So that's one way. Another thing that's cool about that is that it works with MIDI. So the reason I've got it hooked up to both my iPad and the little P6 with my MIDI controller is so I can take advantage of the channels. Now, I would have to close the application because if I have the application open, when I press my buttons here on the MIDI controller, my keys, it's going to trigger that app. So I'm just going to close that down for a second. So the app is no longer open on the iPad. When I press these keys, I don't get anything. But if I change my MIDI channel and I go to shift, on my Arturia, I can go to shift and I can choose pad or key 15, which changes it to MIDI channel 15. I'm now using that MIDI controller to control the P6. The big advantage of that being that we have velocity variation now, because these are fixed, these are set like we discussed at the beginning of the episode. They're a set volume, but with the MIDI controller, all all of a sudden we get velocity variation, and we can record that just as we did before, kind of in real time, or just to the steps now, because this is a sample being brought in from the P6. Let's quickly do that. Let's do that with our drums turned on, because we're not sampling in, we're just recording. We can do. Now, we'll have to do a couple of things. I'm going to turn the delay off because that is currently set to both. If I use the buses, I could just set it to this one sample, but for now, let's just leave it like that. We'll just leave it off. So it's a little bit more plain in terms of the note. And I want to delete out the information that we have here because we've already recorded. So if I come out of keyboard mode, we've got this. Let's take this out. Now when I do record and play, I'm then recording, obviously, that sample, but I'm triggering it via the MIDI controller. And it works across the board for this little unit. What's really clever about it is that it has different modes dependent on the MIDI channel. So if we just come out of that, let's just take record off for a second. We've recorded this bit of information. It's okay. We don't particularly need it. We'll wipe it out in a second. But when I have it on channel 15, it's putting it into this keyboard chromatic mode, taking the one sample and then allowing us to play it. But if we change the MIDI channel on the MIDI controller, we can actually control other things. One of them being, if we had our original drum sample still laid out across the 6 pads, so like a drum kit, I think if you do MIDI channel 11, it will allow you to control that on the MIDI controller as well. So if you want to do finger drumming via your MIDI controller and have velocity at the same time, you can do that, and it will do it for multiple pads. The other option is that you then get into the granular, which is really cool. We choose whatever goes into the granular synth engine. So it's this little pad here. It sounds like that's already the selected sample, but if you need to change it, I think if you're back here, you can just come out of the granular mode. I think it's pattern and granular, and then that would let me choose something else. So if it wanted our drums inside of the granular engine, I would choose pad 3. And you can kind of hear that there. That's the drums being sent through that like granular engine. There are lots of options for the granular engine in terms of grain size and a whole bunch of stuff. We're not going through it in this episode, but that's one way of doing it. And that can still be controlled by the MIDI controller as a separate channel. So let's put it back. Let's go back here. Let's make sure with granular, we're selecting this kind of slightly more melodic note that we had. Ooh, a little bit loud. Need to turn it down, but that is being sent through the granular engine, through the MIDI controller now. And we can add effects to this, the delay, reverb, sends, that type of stuff. And of course, you've got lots of options for playing with sample start and end points and things. All of which can be recorded to the device. So it really opens up a world of possibilities with this thing, because as I said, there are a lot of settings for the granular options. There's lots of stuff that you can tweak and play around with to get some really interesting sound design. Let's come back. What I'm going to do, I'm going to delete this sample. We don't want this because we want to move on and take a look at sample chopping, some of the other options that are available to you. Quickly, I want to delete the step information, but this time I only want to do it for the pad because I want to keep my drums where they were. So we'll do shift and we'll do pattern clear, but I'm going to do pad. It is for the selected pad. Press enter. And when I press this one, no longer do we have any information, but the drum should still be set up on pad 3. There we go. So it's time to bring in another sort of sample. I'm just going to get the iPad back open again, and I'm going to move over to, I don't know, Koala Sampler, somewhere where I can find something. I just need to make sure I don't have any other applications open that will use the MIDI controller. Now, when you're playing with the MIDI controller, what I should say as well is that we've got the different channels that will be controlling the P6. If you just switch it to a MIDI channel that isn't, so like MIDI channel 1, for an example, on my MIDI controller, that just gives you the flexibility of keeping the application open and noodling around. You're not triggering both devices at the same time. I hope that makes sense. So let's go to samples, and I'm going to go to one of my folders. Let's just go with some Beat Butcher stuff because I don't want to get stuck for copyright. And where do I have some Beat Butcher things? I should have some in here someplace. Inside of drums, Beat Butcher. And some music chops. I just want something that is long enough that we can start talking about sample chopping. It's something people are going to be interested in on this device. Let's find a sample. Let me just scroll through, try and find something I haven't used before. Okay, that one's pretty cool. It's got enough interest in the sample that we could think about where we're going to put some sample chops. So the first thing, of course, is we need it sampled to the P6. We go to sampling, choose the sample rate. I'm going to stick with 22 now, and I'll keep it mono for this demonstration just to make sure we've got enough that we can record for a half decent amount of time. Choose a pad, still in standby mode because we haven't changed anything, and we'll just play this one. Now, one thing there, that cut off a little earlier than I was expecting. And the reason for that is because one thing I didn't change was the mode in which we were recording. So quickly, I'm going to delete that and we're going to go back to sampling. And I'm just going to make sure this time it is set back to free mode because that recorded for a specific number of bars and we don't want that. I was thinking I should have got longer sampling time and that's the reason why. So we'll do that again. There we go. Kind of cut off a little bit abrupt there. Generally because we ran out of sampling time. We could have made it longer by putting it into something like 1400 or 1100, but for now that's good enough. It's given us a fairly long sample. So there we go. We've got a sample recorded. Let's talk about the old school method first. This little device does have some automatic chopping, but it's one set style and it's a little bit limited. Typically, on the more modern samplers, the MPC, the SB404 Mark II, Koala sampler, you can do kind of lazy chopping. You can get it to look at the transients and automatically chop it. You can chop by divisions, and sometimes there's other modes as well. With this one, we have chopping by equal divisions. That's the only way when it comes to actually chopping it using the P6 itself. Another way to do it, let's start with the super old school method, is that you would take your pad with the long sample and you would make duplicate copies onto each other pad. And then you can just move through, select the start points for each of those. The cool thing with this is that they do give you mute groups. So if that's the way you want to do it, you can set that up. And my little tip is always that as you move, so you would copy one sample over, you would move the start point first before you copy it over again. That way you don't have to keep moving through the whole sample. That's a quick little tip. But we could set it up with multiple pads, the same copy, shift and voice, and move right to the end where it looks like it says nudger, but that is mute groups. When you go into this menu, for every pad, I can select a mute group, and there's a bunch of those that you can choose from. Well, let's say that's what I want us to do. So if you do it the old school way with multiple copies and then just select your slice points, you can put them into mute groups and then you can play through. It's a little bit more effort than doing it automatically on something like the MPC, but really it's not the end of the world. It's pretty simple. So that's the old school method. The next method is chopping and letting the P6 do it, but it is limited. Really, this works best for loops. The reason it works best for loops is because it chops by equal division, so you can't set the spacing in between. You can choose the amount of chops up to 64 for every single pad. Now, what that's great for is actually increasing the sample storage on the device. By default, 6 pads you have over 8 banks, which I think is 48 samples. So you can store 48 samples at any given time on the device. That's okay. But you can increase that by using a couple of tools. One of those is called Digi Chain. So it's D-I-G-I Chain, just one word. You can search that. It's an online tool that lets you load in WAV files. So you can just take them from your hard drive or something. And what it will do, it creates chains. So let's say we want to split this. On every single pad, I can split up to 64 little chops. If we load in 64 kick drums, just as an example, could be anything, hi-hat, snares, other samples. If we load in 64 of those, we set the sample rate, which you can do through this Digi Chain site itself. Then it will allow us to separate those samples by equal time divisions. It looks at whatever is the longest, I think, and then sets everything else to match. And when it's divided equally, it means that when you load it onto the SP, so from Digi Chain, you can download that chain as one WAV file, use the editing tool to transfer it onto the P6. When you chop it up, if you've got 64 slices or any number in between up to a maximum of 64, we can go in and we can do Shift and Voice, and we can go to Chop, and then we can set a specific amount of slices. So in this case, we could crank it all the way up to 64. It's going to give us 64 individual kick drums, and you can save those to the device, maybe dedicate like a couple of your banks for samples that you want all the time and leave the other banks free for creating your patterns, that type of stuff. But really, that's what you can do. So rather than being able to store just 48 samples on the whole unit, you can store 64 samples per pad and be able to call those up, because once they're chopped up, they show up in keyboard mode. I want to mention that first, but this is how it chops. It chops in equal divisions. And if your samples are spaced equally, which you can do with Digi Chain, then that's what you can do. You can load them up and it gives you perfect kick drums, hi-hats, snares, whatever you want across the board. I'll do a separate episode on that at some point. Shout out to J Maculate. It's the YouTube channel that I was looking at where I first heard about that. It's a really great tip. Anyway, so what we've done, we're going to come out of here for a second. Let's leave this. So when we chop up, and we're going to chop up by equal divisions, it works better with loops because you cannot set individual start and end points for those chops. Now, we just recorded this sample. Let's take a listen to it. So we've got a decent long sample, but it just cuts off at the end because we ran out of sampling time. When we divide that up equally, it's going to give us chops that are somewhat random because it's just going to place them equally across the length of that entire sample. Can be as many as you like. It could be just down to 2 chops all the way to 64. And the cool thing is that it's not set in stone. So if you want to experiment, you can do that. If we go to Shift and Voice on this particular pad, go into Enter, and we could set it. So let's say I want to chop it into 16 pieces. I could do it like that and exit. And you find those now when you're inside of your keyboard mode. So if I go to keyboard mode, you will notice these are kind of dimly lit, but they represent the sample slices that you've chopped up. The disappointing part is that for each of these chops, I have no independent sample start and end points. I can still change the sample start and end point for the entire sample. So if you move the start point, it's going to move all of these like little chops in certain direction, depending on how you're kind of cropping the sample. But hopefully that makes sense as to why using loops typically will give you better chops, because inside of a loop, things will be generally spaced out, particularly with something like a drum loop. You'll find if you chop that, depending on the bar length, into 8 or 16 pieces, it will line up pretty well with those drum sounds. It's going to be a nice way to chop. But when you're talking about a random piece of audio that might have a bit of dead space at the end or something else, it's not really going to chop up very well. So we have some pretty cool chopping because this is per pad. So we can have this sample, and even if we'd done the other method I talked about where you copied and pasted and then had a bunch of bigger chops, you can then kind of have these micro chops that can be triggered underneath. And all of this can be recorded to the step sequencer. It's recorded in real time, but it's limited that you can't change the start and end point of these tiny little micro chops. Anyway, let's go back and quickly take a look at how we could fix that. So if we make it a loop, we're going to have a better chance of getting sample slices roughly where we want them. So let's go to Shift and Voice, go back into Chop. And as I said, if you want to change the chop amount at any point, it's not set in stone once it's sliced. You can always come back and change it. We're just going to turn it off so we don't have any chops. Let's go to the sample and try and just make a quick loop out of it, because this sample does loop. So there. Now, one thing you can do, you can turn loop on if you just want to keep this playing. It's probably not a perfect loop, but you get the idea. We've narrowed that down. Now, when we slice it up, it's more likely to give us chops in the places where we want them to be. Particularly, as I said, you're using a drum loop. It's going to be very useful for getting your slices into pretty much the right position. It does do equal division. So if your drum loop was recorded by a real drummer and it's not snapped to a grid, then yes, some of those little chops might not be very accurate. But as you can see, there's multiple ways to create your chops, so you're not stuck with just this one chopping format, but it is a way to create multiple chops per pad. So if we go back to shift and voice and we split this thing up now that we've kind of cropped it down to a better loop, the slices would probably be in a better position. So we'll do enter. And I don't know, for this, it's not a very long loop. We could maybe take just 4 pieces and then exit out, and we've got our 4 little chops. There you go. You get the idea. So that's another way of chopping. We've got this very old school method of kind of copy and pasting and moving your start and end points around. We've got this chopping per pad, which, as I said, we've got multiple uses for that, particularly when it comes to storing more samples on the device. Check out that Digi Chain. It's worth setting up. You could have like 64 kick drums, 64 hi-hats and snares just as a starting point, so you've got more samples on the device that you can call up at any point, because each of these slices will be another drum sound, anything that you like. But I want to talk about another chopping method that is on this device. This is really cool, something that I haven't seen that often on many devices, not the SP, not the MPC. We're going to come back into our voice. We're going to stay with the same sample, but I'm going to go back to chop. If I come into the right menu, I've gone into the wrong one. Shift and voice, go to chop, take those off. And I'm going to put the length of the sample back to full. The reason for that is I want the full sample to be able to chop up. We're going to chop up now without chopping. This is pretty cool. We can do that using this step recording feature. It's another way of per step we can set kind of automation values. And one of those is the ability to set the sample start point per step. Now, you might be already ahead of me, but for those that don't understand that concept, let's get into it. So we're going to come out of keyboard mode. This is our loop. And with our sample, I'm going to put this on every kind of step here. I want to just make sure step recording is off, and I'm going to put it on every beat throughout this first bar. Okay, so there we go. Now, the pitch of that, let's say we were trying to just get this to fit a little bit better. It's kind of slow. Let's play with the pitch of the sample as it's just moving through for a second. Yeah, I kind of like that. The reason we're going to do this is a couple. One, I'm going to show you this sample chopping, but also so that we can think about the idea of how we put beats together in terms of using our patterns. So that's kind of cool. That might be the intro to something. It feels like it's building up and leading towards something. So I'm going to call that the first pattern. If I go to my patterns, this is pattern 01. I can do shift and copy, and with the patterns, if I go to enter, pattern 01, I want to copy over to pattern 02. I want to make an exact duplicate. Press enter, and it's done that. Now, when we're in pattern mode, if I press play on this first one, and then I'm going to move over, and you can do that with the encoder, or you can just press wherever the next pattern step is. But I'm going to play those in real time. So you can see it waited for the first pattern to finish before it moved into the next one. That's how you're going to make beats on this thing. We're going to stay on pattern 2 because the first one we're just going to leave as the intro. And then we can look at some other stuff here. So let's close pattern down for a second. Just come back to our regular mode. This looks exactly the same because it's a duplicate pattern. And what we can do now, we can turn on our step recording where we can change parameters per step. There's lots to this. You can do this for automating filters and effects, all types of stuff. Really, we're just going to look at one basic thing here, and that is sample start points, because it lets us chop samples without really chopping it. What we do, we choose whatever is the highlighted flashing step, and we move the sample start points. You can mess around, you can experiment, but we're going to be using the sample start points. And I'm going to move this one a little bit because I want it to record that as a bit of automation. So it knows now that this is going to play from the very beginning of the sample. If we move to this step, using the pad, I can audition it, and I can scroll through the sample and find my next slice point, whatever it is that I would like. let's say I want one here. I'm going to do the same on this one. And I'm just going to pick a couple of random places. It doesn't really matter. I just want it to be something slightly different each time. Now, you're not limited to moving through the sample from left to right. If I wanted to, I could add more steps, or even on any of these steps that we've already recorded, I could have it bounce back to the beginning of the sample again and then move through. It's really creative and really fun, and you can experiment and see what kind of patterns you get out of it. But what it's going to do now, as you might expect, it's going to play through, and it's going to be jumping to different parts of the sample, just like you've sample chopped it up. I'm going to turn this recording step off for a second. And there you go. We've recorded it just like that. And if we wanted to, I don't know, we want to add another step here and another step here. And we can fill up all of these. You could get more complex if you move into like 32 steps per pattern, that type of thing. But just keep in mind, it's super flexible. The thing that I really like as well is that all of the original parameters, on top of everything that we can do, and there is a lot more to step recording, but we can do all of the step recording and still use the granular stuff. So if we were over here, like we did initially with our drums, if I want to change the velocity on this step or switch up the timing or do something else, that's all still available to us per step. We're just going to leave it as is for now. The way that this works as well is when you record the step in, it remembers the previous step. So we just added one here and we added one here. This step will play exactly the same as what's on this step because it just remembers what the previous step was, unless we go in and we set recording and we change that to another sample start. But if you wanted to just do kind of like a double trigger of these two and the same over here, that's what we'll get now. So you can hear it's almost like having a delay effect. You get that kind of bounce between the two. But we go back to recording and we choose a completely other, different sample. And I'll go right back to the beginning. Let's find something. And I'm doing this quickly. I'm not really skimming through the sample particularly, but I'm just looking for little parts, whatever it is, something slightly different. Here as well. Just like that. So we're chopping the sample without chopping it. We're just getting it to bounce around through the sample, really. But that's what it acts like. It acts like sample chopping. And don't forget, if you wanted to, you can pitch. Now, if you change the pitch of the sample overall, if you have record off, what will happen if you have play, so as it's playing through and you turn on record, because it records automation, if I started tweaking that pitch, it will record all of that pitch change as it moves through. But if you wanted to, just on an individual step, you could still change the pitch of one of these slices. I could hold this one down and go through here to notes. I've gone past it again. It's the first thing. But if I change the notes and I just move around to a random note, you get this weird pitch change, which doesn't sound very nice, but you get the idea. And by default, I think C4, again, is your root sort of note. So if we go back, we try and find C4, that's C3, so maybe we have to go the other way, somewhere in here. There we go. That will be back to how we had it before. So loads of flexibility, and that is ultimately how we're going to make a beat on this thing, or certainly how I would go about it, because we've created this one pattern that is the intro. If we go over to our patterns and just play that again in real time, I'm going to start with pattern 1. Get the idea. So you can 100% make whole beats on this thing, and that's really how I go about it. Rather than making this video any longer, I'm going to sign off there. I just wanted to look at some of the basic features and functions on this. And when I say basic, these can be very, very complex. We've looked at a few ideas. There's lots more to this little device that we'll look at in other episodes. But for now, I just wanted to get you up and running. That's how I would create a beat. We can sample into the device like a sketchbook, We can resample, we can take effects, we can bake those in. We can start playing around with the multiple different ways to use the MIDI controller or do sample chopping or step parameter changes, recording step parameter changes, that type of thing. There's so much scope to this little unit. For the money, I don't think you can beat it personally. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Take care.